afternoon, everybody. Hello, welcome. I am Trillian Atwood. I'm the Director of Public Programs and Visitor Services at the Jewish Museum of Maryland, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual presentation today, In Conversation, Understanding Jewish Turkey. This program continues our series about global Jewish life. Please consider joining us next Thursday at 7 p.m. for Memories of Jewish Chile with Marjorie Agassi. She'll share stories of the Jewish community in Chile, her experiences living and leaving the country, and how this history informs her fiction writing. Then the following week, on Thursday, August 26th, back at 1 p.m, we welcome Jean Niga for a presentation, Sipping from the Nile. At the close of the program, we'll share some links where you can register for both of these events. So today we are excited to be welcoming back to the JMM one of our absolute favorite presenters, Lori Şen. However, this time with her some friends and family to help us better understand the fascinating historic community of Turkey. So now a quick introduction to our full panel today. Turkish mezzo-soprano Lori Şen is known for her versatility in many vocal genres, including opera, art song, musical theatre, and jazz. Dr. Şen is a leading expert of the Sephardic art song genre that comprises Western classical settings and arrangements of traditional Sephardic folk literature. She currently teaches as a lecturer of voice pedagogy at the University of Maryland School of Music and an adjunct voice faculty at the Peabody Preparatory of Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Moris Şen is an eminent medical doctor in Izmir, Turkey, with degrees from Ege University, Faculty of Medicine. A polyglot and a vicarious reader with an appetite for history and science, Dr. Şen is acknowledged for his knowledge of Jewish history, as well as for his many delightful Izmir Jewish community stories that often involve historical events. Born in Istanbul, Turkey, Linet Şaul, did I get that right? Şaul graduated from Hart School of Music of University of Hartford in Connecticut, USA in 1995. In the same year, after being a finalist in the Leyla Gencer International Singing Competition, she sang in her first opera in Istanbul. Linet Şaul prepared her PhD thesis on the application of Sephardic folk music to classical forms and has been performing her native Sephardic music for many years internationally. She's also been teaching voice and singing diction since 2007 at the Dokuz Elu University. Did I get that one right? State Conservatory in Izmir, Turkey, and currently holds an associate professor and head of opera department position at the university. And then finally, born in Izmir in 1966, Moris Şaul attended Baronova Anadolu High School and graduated from Bogazici University Civil Engineering Department. After graduating an MBA degree from the University of Pittsburgh, he worked for a US multinational company for 9 years, living in the US, Uruguay, and South Africa. Coming back to his home country, Turkey, in 1997, Moris Şaul has been working in his own business. He teaches mindfulness meditation and courses that involve the application of meditation to professional and business life besides his professional activities. So thank you all so much for joining us. And with that, Lori, I hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Trillian, for a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to work with the Jewish Museum of Maryland, and I'm so happy to be back. And with me, I bring, well, Dr. Moris Şen is actually my father. So my dad is in the panel discussion. And Linet Şaul is a former professor of mine. Now I'm just honored to call her a colleague. We performed together too, which was such a wonderful experience for me. And her husband, Moris Şaul, with whom we had conversations about the Jewish history in the past. We were recently interviewed for a documentary with Linet, and then that ended up turning into this long conversation about the Jews of Turkey and the Jewish history. So what I'm hoping is to attempt to share an insight of the Jewish community and life in Turkey through an intimate conversation. And before we move on to the conversation part of it, just for our guests, I would like to share my screen and show where Turkey is and where our community is. So this is, as you can see, the world map, and you can see where Turkey is, with some land in Europe and most land in Asia. And then here is a map of Turkey, and we will be referring to Istanbul, Izmir. As you know, Ankara is the capital of Turkey. Right now, Dr. Şen and Moris and Linet, they're in Izmir, right here. I'm actually in DC right now, so we will be talking about Izmir quite a bit, which is on the Aegean coast, close to the Greek islands and Greece. Okay, so now we have a little bit of a geographical introduction. I will turn to our panelists and start with a question about the history of Jews in Turkey. Would you please tell us how the Jews came to Turkey, or not to Turkey necessarily, but to this geography, and how they established the community there?
You want me to start?
Sure.
Okay, now Jews are naturally originating from Palestine. Palestine, you know, it's in Israel now. It's like a Middle East country. The Jews, if you refer to the Bible, they've been creating communities in Palestine like for 1,000 before Christ, maybe even 2,000 before Christ, but actual history puts them like 700 or 800 before Christ. If you refer to actual historical evidence, probably the biblical narrative does lack evidence of does lack evidence of what happened there at those times. Anyway, but we are sure that like in the 700s before Christ, there was a Jewish nation there. And it was attacked by Babylonians. Then they were taken captive. They went to Babylonia, which is Iraq presently. Then when the Persians released them or took over the Babylonian Empire, they released the Jews. They went back to Palestine. They lived there under the other empires. Like one time they were part of the Alexander the Great Empire, and his general Antiochus. Then the capital was Antakya, Turkey. Then they were subject to Roman rule, and then suddenly they were in conflict with the Romans. They had revolts. Then they were dispersed. They were all the land was captured. There was a temple there. You know about the history. The temple was razed to the ground, and you know the stuff. Then they were dispersed to all over the world. This is the narrative, the historical narrative. As for this geography, we know that Jews were here maybe in 500s after Christ, that is 500, probably because of the Alexander the Great and the other campaigns or the Roman times. They lived here. Then they lived in Europe as well. They were merchants, probably. They had affiliations all over the world. Then they were subject to some anti-Semitism, and they were expelled from few countries. The greatest impact on Jews probably is the Pope Innocent III. Maybe not everybody knows about him, but he's a very important historical figure. This Pope had some, I don't know how to spell it, like it's like a congress, and Christian congress, which decided that the Jews should be expelled from here and there, should not be allowed to live and such as such. So he started the Inquisition, and that followed the expulsion from many countries. France followed, other countries followed, and then at the end, Spain followed. The last one probably was Spain, so we Jews were gathered in Spain a little bit. Then they expelled us from there in 1490 something. So we had to leave. Some people fled to Portugal, which lasted for like 30 more years. Then they were expelled from Portugal too. And the Ottoman Empire at that time was the ruling class in that area, that in Turkey. The Ottoman emperor at that time was, I think it was the Fatih the Conqueror's son, probably Bayezid.
Bayezid the second. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, probably he was a wise man. He said, the Jews are the Spanish loss and my gain. So my country will improve by their merchandising knowledge and economics. They were quite fluent in monetary things, the Jews. So he made a decree telling them that they could come to Turkey. In fact, from Spain, they moved to Turkey through Italy, through Greek islands. So, of course, this didn't happen instantaneously. It took years and years. They had communities mainly in Italy, which is why our language does contain lots of Italian words as well. And they reached Turkey somehow. They settled in the Balkans, in Istanbul, in Edirne, which is Adrianopolis. This is like 300, 400 kilometers west to Istanbul. In a few Balkans, Thessaloniki, which is Greece now, was very famous at that time. But Smyrna, my city, was not very prominent at that time. Sorry, it was a small town. For people who know, Izmir faces Chios. Chios is an important Greek island. The Silk Road. The Silk Road ends in Egypt, Alexandria. Then the goods are brought from Alexandria to Istanbul or the East Mediterranean through ships. Those ships take off from Alexandria. They go through Cyprus, Rhodes, then the 12 important Greek cities, which one of them was Chios. Izmir, facing Chios, was a very small town, but this Bayezid again and his successors probably thought that it would be wise to take control of Chios and put the main weight on Izmir. So they decided to build a very big merchant city. They did so, and Chios became less and less important, while Izmir got more and more important. So I think Jews, like this is 1600s, the Jews also moved to Izmir as well. So at the end, we have two very big cities. One is Thessaloniki in North Greece, and the other one is Izmir, where there is a very large Jewish community. Large meaning like 60,000 in its peak, maybe. 60,000 in Izmir, maybe some numbers even that size in Thessaloniki. They were very important cities. Of course, The people living in Syria, Iraq, Middle East also survived. There were also French, Dutch, Englishmen also living there because of the trading route, the Silk Road again. So all these foreigners in this area is called the Levant. The Levant is this area, mainly centered maybe in Lebanon, but the area around it. So in a way, we are Levantans. That is, we are Levant people. We are part of it. Maybe Jews are part of it. I don't know if they accept it as Levantans, but we are, in fact. Then what happened? Well, this is the other part is contemporary history. You know what happened next. The European Jews were subject to Nazi torture. Then the Turks survived, so the Jewish community survived in Turkey, flourished. Then Israel's state was built up. Then the Turkish Jews also migrated, like every other country in Europe, to Israel. So there are plenty of Turkish Jews in Israel now. And our numbers declined gradually. So we are at what we are now. This is mainly a cover-up of Jewish history in this geographic area. If I skipped anything or missed anything, please remind me. I will correct it.
Thank you for a quick overview. Moris and Linet, would you like to add some stuff to the overview?
If I would like to add a few things also, apart from the history, you know, there's some very interesting, unique things about the history of Turkish and Ottoman Jews. One thing is that the Turkish Jews have been speaking Spanish for 500 years in the Ottoman Empire. This is a very unique thing in the history. Basically, what I heard from linguists, it has not happened anywhere else in history, where people leave one country and keep speaking the same language without any connection to the previous country, but fully adapting to the new country. Mm-hmm. Now, there may be several reasons for this. One thing is, now, you know, in the Jewish world, there are two main categories, what we call Sephardic and Ashkenazi. And strangely enough, Sephardic means Spanish and Ashkenazi means German. So basically, Jews call themselves with either one of the really highest, you know, living that they had in any time in history, where, you know, there was a very big German Jewish civilization, and equally Spanish Jewish civilization was like the top in the world in the medieval times. So the world that the Jews lived in Spain in the medieval times was the times of coexistence. So everywhere the Jews lived, they lived together with Christians and Muslims. You know, Iberian Peninsula was also, there was a lot of Muslims there. And the Jews played the intermediary between Christians and Muslims. So what happened is when the Muslims started to lose against the Christians, in the beginning, the Christians were good with the Jews, but when they were strong enough and it was obvious that they were going to defeat the Muslims in the last 100 years before the expulsion, they were not as tolerant to Jews anymore. So when the coexistence world disappeared and they were expelled from Spain, some of the Jews found a new coexistence in the Ottoman Empire. Now, Ottoman Empire, until 100 years ago, had a significant number of Christian population as well. So where the Jews were living in the Ottoman Empire, all the cities, Istanbul, Izmir, the Balkans, there were a lot of Christians and a lot of Muslims, So in every town and city you would go to, you would have some population of Christian, Muslims, and Jews living together. And this continued this way for 400 years, more or less, in the Ottoman Empire until the modern nationalism came. And the modern nationalism has this idea that everybody who are citizens of the country has to be same. So kind of minorities were not really allowed, and coexistence ended. So, for example, in Turkey, the Turks and the Greeks had big, very serious wars. Same with Turks and other Christians in the Balkans. So it became like a Muslim and Christian war, which in the end, the countries of Greece, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, and Turkey separated, and the coexistence ended. So after the founding of the nationalist states, and especially in Turkey, the Jewish population did not have their environment of coexistence with three different religions anymore. So after that date, most of the Jews started to emigrate. So in the beginning, they emigrated to South America because in Argentina especially, and Uruguay, their language, Spanish, was quite similar, so they were comfortable with the language, and they were rich countries at the time with many opportunities. Then they emigrated to France and other European countries before the Second World War, and with the establishment of Israel, most emigrated to Israel. So today we can say that more than 90% of Turkish Jews have emigrated. Today we are left with maybe about 15,000 Jewish people in Turkey, most of them living in Istanbul. But if the Ottoman Jewish population of Turkey had stayed in Turkey and increased with the average population growth of the country, we would be like 500,000 Jews today. So it's a significant culture actually in the Jewish world. And it's an interesting and unique history as well.
Well, I find it very interesting and very stimulating what Moris Şaul told us. In fact, I have a book to recommend. I show it like that. Maybe you can see it. No, you can't.
We'll write it in the chat box later. People of the
book.
People of the book.
The Forgotten History of Islam and the West. It's written by Mr. Zahari Karabel. It's about Spanish Cordoba. It tells us how when people lived the three religions together in as he said, 1/3 was Jewish, 1/3 was Muslim, and 1/3 was Christian in the Iberic Peninsula, especially in the south, where Cordoba is situated. And Cordoba was like had a population of 100,000 population in the year 1000, like, or 900. This is like Paris was like a town of 700 people maybe at that time. London was maybe had 1,000 people, but Cordoba had 100,000 people, had a sewage system, water in every house, like castles, and the caliphs, the Khalif or Khalifa, whatever it's called.
Caliphate.
The Caliphate pension, it's there, still there. In this book, it states that if a German prince would come to Cordoba at that time, the German prince didn't probably have windows in his castle at that time, and he lived on fire, maybe slept on some farm or whatever, like room. But Cordoba had luxury, and he would think this is another world. All this went away when the Christian decided to expel the Muslims and the Jews from Spain. they created another world. But this is true what Moris Şaul said. When the three religions coexisted together, it had huge implications. They were a leap forward in human history. Always this happened. He is right about that. Beyazıt, when he invited the Jews to Turkey, he caused such a leap, and probably the success of the Ottoman Empire, it lasted for 1,000 years, probably lasts on this coexistence together, because they were really tolerant about all the three religions, and they coexisted together until in the 700s, the nationalist movements started, and all this went away. All this world went away. It's very nice that he brought this up. This is really a very important historical fact. You should read this book, Zahari Karabakh, People of the Book.
I think they just put it in the chat box. All the information is there about the book for those who are interested. Yeah. Well, since we're now closer to the contemporary history, how about we switch to a little bit about our family stories? For example, I'd like to ask Moris and Linet, how did your families come to Izmir and Istanbul? I know. How did you meet? Well, you of course feel free to tell that story too, because we do want to talk about how the Turkish Jews live in Turkey in terms of their social lives and how they interact. So that is something we would love to touch on as well. So if you feel comfortable, please feel free to talk about that as well. But I'm curious how your families ended up in Istanbul and Izmir, because I know Linet was born in Istanbul. So I'll ask them first, and then I'll get to the Şen family as well.
Hi. Yes, I think Moris has explained really well the history of the Jews. I'm from Istanbul. My mother, she was from Edirne, and my grandfather was a butcher, and so they lived in Istanbul in a neighborhood we can call a ghetto. At the time, it wasn't really a ghetto, but all the Jews lived in the Galata area, neighborhood in Istanbul, and they all knew each other, and so all the shops, they were all Jewish people, and so they interacted with each other, and they spoke Spanish, they spoke Ladino to each other. And my mother and father, they were living in the same apartment building, but my mother was a friend of my father's cousin, so they always used to gossip about him. Oh, Monsieur Léon, because he was much older than my mother, like 16 years of age. So every day they would say, Sarah, my mother is Rachel, Sarah, look, your uncle is going again to meet with a girl in a patisserie. In those times they would meet, they would get a flower, and they would really dress well and go to a pastry shop to meet with the bride to be, or I don't know, date to be. So I think they counted. My father did that around 85 times or something, but they ended up marrying each other. She was making fun of him, but at the end, they got married.
So your family was in Istanbul?
Yes.
For a long time.
For a long time. Mm-hmm. For a long time. Then Moris's family, you could.
Yeah, I can. My family some of them were in Izmir, some of them, my grandparents, born in the small towns surrounding Izmir, because up till 1950s, there were like Jewish community offshoots in the small towns around, and people would, have smaller trades over there. But after 1950s, they all moved to Izmir or to Israel. But in Izmir, there wasn't Jewish neighborhood, well, actually two Jewish neighborhoods. And basically all the Jewish people lived there. The women spoke only Spanish, like Ladino. My grandmother couldn't speak any Turkish or very little things. The men would go out and they would work, so they would speak Turkish, but with a tough accent. Or older men would speak Greek also, because the street language in Izmir in the older days was Greek. And it was like, they all have these funny stories. It wasn't, not everybody was rich. There was many poverty at the time also. But every time they had this, like, even if families were poor, they would they would always live or show that, they are at a certain level. Always dinner time, you put the tablecloth, you never have, all the women had these laws, like you had to have your flowers. Every Jewish woman had to have certain flowers in their gardens, and they were all the same. So it was a very customary lifestyle, and all Spanish speaking. Well, when my parents' generation, it started to change a little bit. So they started to live a more modern lifestyle, more open. And yeah, by the time it came to our time, we didn't have enough Jewish people anymore. So we had our core Jewish friends, but then we had a lot of non-Jewish friends as well. Whereas my parents' generation, for example, all their friends are Jewish. It's like all their circle is Jewish. But in our time, it's changed a little bit. But I went to the university in Istanbul. That's where I met Linet. And
yeah, my neighbor used to tell me, we have a nice group and lots of people from Izmir. And there's this nice Jewish guy that you have to meet. And he kept telling me the same thing, this Jewish guy. And then one day, okay, I said, yes, okay, I will meet. And I went upstairs and I met him.
One thing interesting though about, our Jewish community was in Turkey, especially in the older days, it was like our traditions was quite different than the local Turkish customs. Like the typical Turkish family was quite different. Like the Jewish family really looked like a typical Greek, Italian, Spanish family. And the Turkish families had a different tradition. Now it's getting, life's getting modern. Everybody's getting similar. So.
But again, in our circle, our friends know that, our Muslim friends, I can say, that on Shabbat, Friday night, we don't go out and we have a family gathering, and they really envy that we have one day of the week that we are forced to be together, which is, I think, it's nice because sometimes they don't see their families for a long time. At least they say, you have this day to look upon.
To put things in context a little bit, I just want to make sure that the audience knows Turkey is about 99.8% Muslim. Yeah. So it's a Muslim country where the Jewish population is, as Moris said, it's about 15,000 currently. And in Izmir, I believe it's maybe 1,500.
Less.
Yeah.
Less.
So it's a very small community. And here we kind of represent three different generations. As I said, Moris Şen is my father. And then Moris and Linet are kind of like in between in terms of my dad and me, in terms of age. And I'm pretty sure that we all experience social life in a different way. So from generation to generation, there was a huge difference. Not only interactions with other communities and other communities of different religions, but also the use of Ladino, for example. I know that my generation does not speak as much. And I was glad that Linet had some French words in there too, because I do want to talk about Ladino and how the Jewish communities were also making use of French a lot. French was kind of like the second language, not Turkish, but Ladino and then French. So yeah, I do want to ask my dad a little bit about our family story too, because I know that our family was a little bit in Greece and a little bit in, the outskirts of Izmir, and then finally gathered in Izmir.
I'll tell you about it.
But I do want you to talk about the language stuff a little bit as well, and maybe the social life as well.
I'll try to remember that. But I should start with how Izmir was in my childhood. My childhood was the 60s, like 1960s. at that time, Izmir had, the Greeks had moved out. Like in 1920s, most of the Greeks moved out. Izmir was 1/3 Greek, 1/3 Turkish Muslim, and 1/3 Jews, mainly. In my childhood, I remember in primary school, there was a population poll which stated Izmir was 250,000 people, and the Jewish community was like 30,000 people in my childhood. So 30,000 people was quite a number. I remember as a child seeing there was a yeshiva. Yeshiva, for people who don't know, is a Turkish religious school. Their teachers wear black hats and black costume-like jackets and pants, and they are called rabbis. I remember seeing 5 or 6 of them walking together in the community and experiencing a grandeur or experiencing how do you say that, a kind of value. Now you won't see that. Probably it's because religion is getting less important, maybe. Anyway, this was a vibrant community in the Jewish sense. 1/3 was Greek, probably. And I remember when I walked in the streets with my grandmother, which we lived together. My grandmother, as Moris Şaul said, didn't know how to speak Turkish. She had a very, very bad, maybe a few words only to shop in the street. She was fluent in Ladino, in French, and in Greek. When we Izmir is like it had a Greek quarter, a Jewish quarter, and a Turkish quarter. The Greek quarter was where we went for shopping. When we went with my grandmother almost knew everyone by name and spoke Greek fluently with them, with the shops, with sellers, with friends. But when it came to social status, like we had guests at home, it was Ladino. If the guests were important, then it was French. French was probably the most important language. For example, when I started my French learning at the age of 5, they made me learn French. This was very important. If you didn't know French, you probably were half of the men at that time. So French was very important. English was not. I don't know why, but very few people spoke English. In fact, the first time I heard about English when I went to high school. French was very important, so it was spoken. Hebrew was not. Hebrew, I didn't hear any Hebrew in my childhood, except when you went to the synagogue. But Hebrew was not spoken language until very recently, although there were efforts. There is this Haskalah thing. Haskalah is the Jewish Enlightenment. The Jewish, like the European Enlightenment, which happened in the 17th, 18th centuries, which involves progress in science and stuff. The Jewish also took part in it, and this is called the Jewish Haskalah, which means the Jewish Enlightenment. There were efforts to revive the Hebrew language at that time, and with a little success. But I don't know why, but Hebrew was not spoken around here. In my childhood, I didn't hear very much. Yes, Ladino, French, Greek was the main languages we spoke. Of course, Turkish was the native language we learned. My grandfather, my grandmother never went to Turkish schools. That's why they didn't know how to speak Turkish. They had their own schools, Jewish schools, Alliance schools, which Alliance schools also are part of that Jewish Enlightenment I was talking about. With those Enlightenment series, a new educational system came into being, and this is called the Alliance schools, gathered in the Levant, that is in the Middle East area, There were maybe hundreds of them. They had specific teachers, which one of my uncles was a very famous teacher of them. So this probably caused them not to learn Turkish and speak mainly French and Ladino. As for the family history, my father's side was rural. In fact, they come from Milas, which is a rural town. They had small business there. They did some farming, mainly tobacco at that time. My grandfather's side was a little more sophisticated. There are rabbis stuff in it. He was a banker. Not very religious rabbi, though, probably. He was a banker. He lived in the city, and he was a city man. From Milas, when there was in Turkey after the Turkish takeover in 1923, there was not much education in rural areas. The country was poor. The country was remnants of a huge empire, and the Anatolian rural areas were not doing very well. And there were like 3 or 4 big wars that crushed them. So the population was poor, the population was sick, the population was illiterate. For example, in the town that my father lived, now it's like 200,000 people living, a big city now. It was a very small town with 2,000 Jews at that time. Like the town was maybe 10,000. The 2,000 were Jews. They had an Alliance school, the important schools I mentioned, but they didn't have a high school. So in 1940, when the time of going to high school came for my father, he had to move to Izmir, which in the all Aegean area, there was only one high school that people could go. So my father chose to come to Izmir and go to high school. This also reflects the fact that we Jews have a tendency to go to school more than the average Ottoman Empire citizen, or maybe the European citizen also can be compared. The Jews are more literate than their counterparts, probably. I don't have real statistics about it, but it's kind of my observation. So my father, coming from a very rural town, son of a 6 my grandfather had 6 children. So in a rural area, they didn't need to go to high school, but all of them, the 6 of them, 3 girls and 3 boys, chose to go to Izmir and to go to high school. Then he went to university as well. So they had to move to Izmir for that. So the family decided to move. We moved, and until very recently, we also kept the house in Milas, but like in 1970s, after I had a few chances to visit it, we decided to sell it, and now we don't have any roots in Milas anymore, but until 1970s we had. So we moved to Izmir, and that's the remaining of the story goes with the Izmir story, like my father and my mother's destinies intersect and they go parallel then. The Izmir life was, as others are telling, like a city with 3 or 4, like the one in Cordoba, the 3 religions together, a very vibrant culture, very interesting opportunities, merchandise, export, import, lots of ships coming and going, lots of languages spoken. So it was a very interesting city. My childhood passed in that city, and it was a nice childhood. We had friends from all religions, and I wouldn't say we were stuck as a ghetto in a certain population. We didn't feel the pressure that much. I studied in Turkish schools anyway, but half of my friends went to Jewish schools as well. So it was not it was all possible, maybe. So this is what I remember now. If you have specific questions, I will gladly answer them.
So can we say that maybe during my grandparents' time or in early 1900s, around the time of the...
Grandparents' time was not a very good time because your grandparents, that is my father's, were subject to Second World War.
Right.
Which is a very, very tough time for Jewish populations, not in Turkey, but in Europe as well. In fact, it was tougher in Europe. I can tell you hundreds of very bad stories about it. In fact, two of my aunts who lived in Rhodos were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. It's a concentration camp, and they died there. My grandfather's, my grand uncle, who was a very prominent man, he was head of a bank in Italy. He was shot in Italy, although being a Turkish citizen. They didn't let him stay there, so he was shot by German Nazi soldiers. So every family that you know probably has stories like that. So my father's time was a tough time. In Turkey, they didn't have that much, that big problems. Like they had the varlık vergisi, which is this special tax in 1941 or 42, which took the state decided to take all the money from all the Jews. So they were left bankrupt. I remember my father. Well, this is a family history. When they came from Milas. They had very close relations with Milas, that is the rural area. So they were doing some farming exports, but this was probably a very conventional merchandise. And they made huge money out of it. My father, after finishing high school, decided to stay with the export company because he said we were making money like fools. You know, there were piles of money every night. So they were getting very rich. They bought houses. They lived in best quarters. But after the tax was 100,000 Turkish liras. You could buy a whole apartment for 2,000 at that time. So it was like
apartment building?
50 apartment buildings. The tax was that. So they paid all the tax. And my grandfather became bankrupt. He didn't have one lira. So my father had to go to medical school to make a living. The others did jobs here and there. So the richness went away overnight. So this was a great impact on the Jewish life. Because this was probably the first time they were experiencing such injustice. Maybe before my father's time, the Jews had faced injustices, but as for my father's generation, this was a huge impact. I think then they never trusted the government after that. They had the Jews in Turkey. This goes parallel with nationalistic developments all over the countries, not specific to Turkey. Europe was the same as well. So this tax, the varlık vergisi tax, has a huge impact on the Jewish population, my father's generation. Gladly, we didn't face such problems. What we faced, my generation faced the appearing of an Israeli nation, which was quite a problem. It was not very simple. And three big wars we faced. I remember the 67 wars when Israel, if lost, would cease to exist. So I remember the praying in the synagogues and crying about the consequences. So it was a very important part of my childhood, the existence of an Israeli nation. Probably your generation took it for granted. They didn't, because it was existing and it's still existing. You
Right.
took it for granted. But in my time, was a new foundation, and probably we were afraid that it could cease to exist. Well,
I feel like from generation to generation, the experience of being Jewish in Turkey has changed. From my grandparents' generation to your generation to Moris and Linet's generation, and then mine, and then Moris and Linet have a beautiful daughter who is, I believe, 17 now. So I'm sure she's experiencing it in a different way as well. And it's interesting to me that in the recent generations, there has been such a dramatic change. And I did want to talk about Ladino a little bit as well, and I did want to talk about Sephardic music a little bit as well, but I feel like we're running out of time. But I do want to ask Linet, since you perform Sephardic music a lot, so maybe you can talk about how this music is perceived in Turkey and elsewhere, because you perform this outside of Turkey as well. So would you like to talk about that a little bit, and then the Ladino language?
Yeah, all the Sephardic songs are in Ladino. Sephardic songs are songs that were discovered, or how do you say? Originated. Both some from Spain, and usually the words and the story is from Spain, but the music couldn't come up to these years because it wasn't written. And then here in Ottoman Empire, some of the songs were affected by Turkish, influenced by Turkish music, of course. So you can hear some songs, you can hear the melodies like very Spanish, and some songs very Turkish, and also some would start with Ladino and continue with Turkish, and some were influenced by Greek music as well, and some from popular songs at the time of Charleston or tango. They were they liked some melodies, a song in Europe, and they wrote Ladino words, and so we called them Sephardic songs as well. So as I grew up, I learned, of course, a lot of these songs. My mother used to sing at home. Both of my uncles were amateur musicians. One played guitar, the other played the accordion. So at home, when we gathered, we would play these songs and perform. So as I was doing my doctorate thesis, I thought that was the good time, to really look more into these songs and learn more songs before that I didn't know before. Because in Istanbul and Izmir, they're so close to each other, these two cities, but their music, the makams, they use the makams a little differently, as they have different use of Ladino. Here they might speak a little differently, they would pronounce a little differently. Also, as the kitchen, we have different meals, so we have the same culture from Spain, and here, mixing with the Turkish culture, but still 500 kilometers could make a big difference. I could tell one thing funny. When I came for the first time to Izmir to meet Moris's parents, my mother-in-law, she's telling her daughter, she's saying, "Did you put the handrajos in the oven?" Handrajo could be is a meal in Izmir, but it's a clothing, it's a cleaning cloth, you know, in Istanbul. So I'm like, what am I going to eat tonight? You know, some cleaning stuff. Apparently, it's a pastry thing which has an eggplant sauce, eggplants and zucchini in it. So it was
Wow, so there are differences between the Ladino language, like between Istanbul and Izmir. This is something I'm hearing for the first time. I thought it was the same throughout Turkey.
No. They have even different sayings, you know, different things. Just the other day, I was telling to my mother-in-law, we say this in when you don't wanna have nothing to do with a person. You say poco ilaka, which is poco is a little. Ilaka is alaka in Turkish, little to do with that person. But here, for example, they say lejos. You know lejos. That person could be far from us. We don't want. You know, it's the same thing. But you know, even this, you know, time so many years. She could say, "Oh, I didn't know that you refer this like this."
Like
So,
say kila and kal.
yes,
We
yes.
use the kila word for synagogue. They don't use it.
Yeah.
In
And
Istanbul.
midrash with meldado, for example. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But even there's a stranger thing also in Salonika in Greece. That's the Ladino center actually, because you know Salonika, Greece, until the Second World War was a Greek city. It was a Jewish majority city, and the port was closed on Shabbat. And you know, even Theodor Herzl, to have his idea for Israel could exist, he saw Salonika, and he saw that the Jews could do all the works. And there, the Ladino they spoke over there. Instead of the H sound of the Spanish, like hacer, to do something, they say facer. Or,
Like the Portuguese.
yeah, like the Portuguese way, or the old Spanish way, which is really strange. Why one city speaks Ladino in a bit more Portuguese way?
How do you say iron in Spanish?
In Spanish, hierro is
Hierro.
iron, is hierro, but in ferro,
All the Latin languages, iron starts with an F.
yeah,
The chemical symbol for it is F.
Yeah.
F.
Fer in Ladino, fer in French. Hierro. Why does it start with H?
but that Spanish
Let me
characteristic.
tell you another word. Why is Hernando Cortez? Why is the name Hernando? There is no Hernando, it's Fernando.
Fernando.
All the languages.
But in Spanish,
There is
the Latin.
big HF ambiguity here.
No, it's-
I don't know when the Spanish decided to use H instead of F.
No, the
Somewhere
Spanish dropped it.
300 until now. Somewhere in between, they broke the language. The
No,
Spanish.
it changed in history, but for some reason the Salonican Ladino kept the F, and we don't keep the F, which is strange because we came from Spain in the same time.
How do you say sun in Spanish?
No,
Ijo.
Ijo in our
Start with
Ladino.
an H. In all
But-
the Latin languages, it starts with an F. Figlio.
Yeah, but in
In
Salonika,
Italian, it's figlio. In French, it's fils. Why the H?
but in Salonican Ladino, it's Fijo. They call it Fijo. Fija.
So that's it. Then the Portuguese were reluctant to change it, but the Spanish did.
But yeah.
I don't know why.
So this was a nice presentation of how complicated Ladino can be.
Yes, it is.
In a brief discussion about F and H. But yeah, so since we're out of time, we have to wrap it up. But I do want to make sure that we get one of the Q&A questions. And there's a question about what the situation is like in Turkey today. Say if one wants to visit the local Jewish community and synagogues.
Ken?
They might ask to Moris
Or
to have a tour, or
to
you.
the other Moris.
Both Morises.
I really am not much into synagogues, but probably they exist and they are there, and you can visit them. I'm sure it's visitable.
Yeah, you can.
I really haven't been into one
I mean, in terms of, I think safety, people were more concerned about safety when they were asking about this. So,
As for safety, in the synagogues, we had quite a bit of, very serious terrorist attacks. So, first of all, if you ever come to Turkey and want to visit a synagogue, you should contact the local community in advance, because there is serious security at the entrances of the synagogues, especially both in Istanbul and in Izmir.
Istanbul is even more.
Istanbul is even more. I mean, for visiting, it's okay. I mean, it's not a big, let's say, worry. You can visit Turkey, also the Jewish community.
I mean, if you tell them in advance, you could have a nice tour, but maybe at the last minute they wouldn't let you visit it.
Yeah, I would say there's no problem visiting, but it should all need to be arranged in advance, because
In terms
we
of
have
safety, I wouldn't say we are in any danger, in any danger.
are the synagogues active? Are there active prayers? So would they be
Yes.
able to experience some of
But
the prayer?
look at it this way. For example, in Izmir, we have like one new synagogue, but modern one, but 5, 6, or even with the other one, 8 historical synagogues that are 400 years old, which can be toured, but they are not open to public, like only with a prior
Tour guide.
arrangement. Yeah.
In fact, there
In
is
Istanbul,
one
it's the same.
Abed we used to pray, if I'm not
Well,
wrong.
in the local, like one synagogue is open before the pandemic. It was open every day. One synagogue was open every day. And in Istanbul, I think maybe 3 synagogues were open every day. But with the pandemic, it's like they're opening once a week or twice a week. Yeah.
Okay,
3 times a week, my father-in-law.
Thank you very much. I know we're running out of time, so I know we need to wrap it up very soon. I know that I didn't get to a bunch of questions of mine, and and I couldn't get to a lot of the questions in the Q&A. So maybe one day we can do a part 2 of this of this session. Trillian, I'll just leave it to you to wrap it up.
You took the words out of my mouth. I was just about to say it feels like there needs to be a part 2 to this conversation. So everyone be warned, there might be an email coming soon. But yeah, so thank you all for joining us this afternoon, especially Lori, Moris, Linet and Moris, and Laura, who's been working on the tech behind the scenes. Please consider using the links that should be popping up in chat in one moment to enjoy a recording of the previous presentations from this series, Exploring Global Jewish Life. There'll also be links where you can register for the other upcoming programs in the series. Just as a quick reminder, as you leave, if you can please take a moment to complete the form that you'll be directed towards, it really does help us. And just with that, thank you all so much. Thank you for just such a fascinating conversation. It was amazing. And we hope to see everybody again very soon. Have a wonderful day.
Inviting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was great to see everybody. I haven't seen them in a while, so
Let's get together.
yeah. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.